Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 3. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and today's episode is so good. I love this topic. We are talking about time management. Do you run your day, or does your day run you? This is such a relevant topic. If you missed episode number 2, we talked about the things that tend to hold us back, why we get stuck. And one of the issues is that we tend to have these excuses. And one of the biggest excuses I hear from attorneys is, I don't have time. I don't have time. I'm just so busy. I don't have time. I get it. You are busy. Between billable hours and your other commitments, you are super busy. I get it. But my guess is that you can actually create more time in your day if you, 1, learn to manage your time better, and 2, get better at prioritizing. This is such a big issue. And if you can start to take back some of that control, if you can get a handle on your day, it frees you up to do the things that matter most to you. It allows you to prioritize and support your personal and professional goals. But if you don't have a system in place, if you don't know how to choose what to focus on, if you are just constantly putting out fires, then your day is running you. This isn't about finding spare time in the morning or before you go to bed, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about this, but my mornings are precious. My evenings are precious. I am not going to work during those times. If that works for you, if putting the kids to bed and then picking back up your laptop works for you, great, do it. But I would rather see you manage your day better so that you can put your kids to sleep and then you just have free time. What would that be like? Well, we're going to address it today. We're going to tackle this issue. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you have some concrete ideas as to how you can start to prioritize better, manage your time better, and create more time for what you really want to be doing. All right. So this starts with a discussion of the priority matrix. Now, I generally assume that everyone has seen this matrix, but when I'm doing workshops and I ask, who's familiar with the priority matrix, I generally only get a few show of hands. And then when I draw the matrix, a few more hands go up and they say, oh, now I know what you're talking about. But for the most part, even if you have an awareness of what the priority matrix is, you're probably not using it. It's probably been a while since you've seen it, and it's worth a refresher. And if you've never heard of it before, this can be a game changer. Now, Eisenhower is really the one that came up with this concept, but Stephen Covey made it famous in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So here's what President Eisenhower said that really started this priority matrix revolution. What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. Now that sounds simple, but it's deep. I'm going to repeat it. What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. Okay. And this is why we end up saying that we're putting out fires all day when the truth is we're just spinning our wheels and wasting our time. So let's talk about what this matrix looks like. I am going to describe it to you. This is a podcast, but if you want to actually see it, you can go to hustleandflowpodcast.com/3. 3, and it will be in the show notes, and I have a free download for you there as well. So when you're thinking about this matrix, it's literally a box. We have 4 quadrants. And imagine that you have an x-axis, and on the x-axis, that's urgency. On the y-axis, that's importance. So at the very bottom left hand, we're going to make that a 0. So 0 importance, 0 urgency. If you're on that x-axis and you take it all the way out to the right, then you're going to have a 10 urgency. On the y-axis, if you take it all the way to the sky, you're going to have a 10 importance, okay? So this is a little bit different, the way that I have it set up, than how Stephen Covey designed it in his book. But that's partly because I see it a little bit differently than he does. And so for purposes of today, I'm going to describe it the way that I use it. And I don't want to say that lawyers are special, but I find that sometimes we think a bit differently than others. So if I see it differently, I'm thinking you might as well. So I'm going to share with you the way I look at it. Okay, so you've got the basic setup, and we're going to start with the top left-hand quadrant. So that means it's between a 5 and a 10 on importance, and it's a 0 to a 5 on urgency. Okay? So it's important, but there's no deadline. You can do it whenever. And maybe there is a deadline, but it's a few months off. Okay? That is quadrant number 1. Quadrant number 2, we're going to move to the right. This is a 10 on importance and a 10 on urgency. So 5 to 10. 5 to 10 on importance and 5 to 10 on urgency. This is an emergency, right? Hair on fire. Okay. So now let's move down. By the way, that's quadrant number 2. Now let's move down directly below, and you have a 5 to 10 on urgency, but a 0 to 5 on importance. This is an unimportant emergency. Okay? And then, so that's quadrant number 3. And then the very last quadrant, quadrant number 4. This is a 0 to 5 on importance and urgency. So it's not important and there's not a deadline. Okay, so now that I've given you those 4 quadrants, I really want to dig into each and every single one of them and tell you how to start prioritizing based upon this matrix. Okay, let's start with quadrant number 2, because this is where most people think that they are spending their time. So let's do it first. Okay, quadrant number 2. This is the top right-hand quadrant of the matrix. So it is both urgent and important. Okay? This is where you are truly drinking from a fire hose. And we think that this is how we spend our days, but it's not really. Okay, so what would be urgent and important? Well, a TRO, that definitely falls in that category. If you have any type of client emergency where you have to run into court, right? Like there's no option. You have to run into court. That falls in the urgent and important category. Now, that's assuming it's actually important and not just made up, okay? But assuming it's important, that would fall in the category. A family emergency, that falls in that category. There's not much else that actually falls there. Not really. What happens is because we don't manage our time well and we procrastinate, quadrant 1, important but not urgent, at some point suddenly becomes urgent. We suddenly have a deadline that we have to meet, and something from quadrant 1 shifts over into quadrant number 2, right? So then it truly is urgent and important, but it didn't have to be that way. Okay? So I'm talking about here things that naturally start from this place. A truly important emergency. So I want you to take a moment and just think about for yourself, if you were looking at these 4 quadrants, when was the last time that you had something truly fall in that category? Urgent and important. If you're being honest, Probably not much. Probably not much. This is where you drop everything and you just handle it in that moment. Okay, we'll come back to this. Let's move to quadrant number 3, which is urgent but not important. And this, my friends, is where you're really spending the vast majority of your time. Okay, so what falls in this bottom right-hand quadrant? Emails, texts, phone calls, walk-ins, quick questions, emergencies. Okay, I have the quick questions and emergencies. I'm doing air quotes because they're generally not quick questions and the emergencies may or may not be real. How many of you have your emails up all the time? And if a text message comes in, you immediately look at your phone. And if a phone call comes in, you just pick it up. We call this good customer service, but it may not be that great. There may be other ways in which you can still provide fabulous customer service, but you actually do a better job at servicing the client by being focused on the work that matters the most. And if you have a better outlook on life, if you are managing your time better overall so that you have a life outside of work and you feel refreshed and on top of things, you're going to work from a clearer state of mind, be more creative, and be more productive. So in many ways, I think that claiming we do these things from a customer service perspective is well-intentioned, but not reality. All right. So when an email comes in, if you are immediately responding to that email, no matter what you're doing, chances are that there was nothing about that email that was important, right? And it's not even urgent except for the fact that we now live in this culture where everyone is available 24/7. And we have created this, almost expectation that people are going to respond back immediately. So when you get an email, I would suggest it's probably not even urgent. But again, if that's what's happening in your brain, if you think you need to respond immediately, then it falls within that urgent category. But it may not be important. Same with texts and phone calls. Now, they could be important. But my question is, what process are you using? What are your filters for deciding, is this important and worthy of an immediate response or something I should get to later? And very few people have a process that they're following. They simply just start responding as soon as something comes in. And this is where you get on that wheel, right? And it's spinning and you feel like you are truly drinking from a fire hose and you don't know how to make it stop. We're going to spend some time talking about this quadrant because this is where you make it stop. Okay, so again, on walk-ins, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about, this is where you have an open door policy and anyone can come in and ask you questions anytime they want. You are a team player and everyone is welcome to come into your office. This would be something that in your mind is urgent because there's someone standing right there, but it's likely not important. Quick questions. This is the same thing. Like someone just comes in, they're like, I've got a quick question for you. And this is generally from a colleague in your firm or someone in administration. They're like, I've just got a really quick question. The problem is when you're trying to get something done and you're trying to focus on your work, these emails, these phone calls, these walk-ins, these quick questions, they completely disrupt and take over your day. Which is why by the end, you're like, where did I spend all of my time? It's hard to even account for it. And often we don't even track this stuff very well. So you've been at work all day, you're exhausted. And if you're in a law firm and you're actually billing, you're like, how did I only bill 6 hours, but I have been crazy for 9 hours? Well, you've lost probably 3 hours to these quick questions, these emergencies that may or may not be emergencies, these walk-ins, phone calls. They completely take over your day and they're not always related to a client matter that you can bill for. Or because it's a quick question, maybe in your mind you think, oh, I shouldn't be billing the client for this. So when you're in this quadrant, you are simply being reactive. You're reacting to all of the stimuli around you. Okay, so how do you take back your day? Because this is a big one. This is the quadrant where you need to spend the most time with a new process and a new filter. So think about it from the perspective of if you were in a deposition, or if you were in court, or if you were in a really important meeting where you couldn't be on your phone, or let's say you're closing a deal and everything's hairy and crazy and you simply can't deal with anything else, right? We all have those experiences where we truly are out of pocket and we cannot handle any requests. How do you deal with those days? Some of you may have an out of office notification, and that gives you comfort that you don't have to worry about it. Some of you may have an assistant or an associate or someone else that's going to help filter that for you. Or people just try to resolve things on their own. They figure out how to solve a problem without coming and asking you. There are many different things. But if you can put yourself in the situation of the days in which you give yourself permission to not answer every question coming and going, then that can give you an idea of how you can structure all of your days. Because if the world doesn't stop, if you don't lose all of your clients simply because you're in a deposition or an important meeting, why does that change simply because you're at your desk? That is a story that we have created in our own minds and our own heads, and it's not real. You can take back your day by choosing to look at it differently. Okay, so how do you do this practically? Well, one is to have a great assistant. And I get that some of you may not get to choose who your assistant is, and perhaps you don't think they're that fabulous. If that's the case, I encourage you to try to train them and work with them, or really, really push HR to give you someone better and get really specific as to what you're looking for, what better means to you, because this is critical. I'm sure you all know of attorneys in your firm that are extremely busy, right? They're probably some of the biggest rainmakers in your firm, and they have a ton of matters going on, and they literally can't respond to every email and phone call. But they have a really good assistant that is on the front lines handling that for them. I always encourage people to give their assistants access to their emails. And I get so much pushback. One of the things that I hear is, oh, well, I have personal emails in there. Okay, well, stop using your work email as a personal email. Tell all of your friends and family, please stop sending me personal emails to my work account. Here's my personal email account. That's easy. If having a personal email account is within your work account is more important than taking back your day, I think you just want to sit with that for a minute and think about it. Okay, so here's another one that I hear. Well, I get a lot of really confidential information. Depending on your role, that may or may not be true. Most firms and companies can set up systems within your emails, whether it is flagging or just an access issue, so that your assistant is only receiving things that are not flagged as confidential. It is going to require a little bit of work on the front end, but it's going to save you a ton of time on the back end. And then last is when you give unfettered access to an assistant to your email and you say, hey, look, I trust that you're going to keep this confidential, you're actually inviting them and encouraging them to be a key member of your team. You know, I've spoken to a lot of assistants that often would share with me that they felt like their role was not important, that they were simply a paper pusher. You know, I don't know what it was like back in the day, but there are a lot of assistants out there that have worked longer than we have, and they remember the days when they were an integral part of the office. They knew the cases, they knew the clients, and they enjoyed having that ownership and in that involvement because they were respected and part of the team. And in many companies and law firms, the way that assistants are used now, they are, I don't want to say a commodity, but they're not being utilized. Like they're just typing or they're just filing and they're not part of something larger. When you give them permission to be part of your team and part of something larger, you might actually be surprised at how they become your secret weapon and how they are suddenly more productive and they are coming up with ways to help you even more. So I would encourage you to try out giving your assistant permission to help you be on those front lines in guarding against emergencies. So how does this work? Obviously, you need to have really clear communications with your assistant as to what you need and how they should respond to certain emails. And this is going to be a process. You can't just hand it over one day and expect your assistant to be a mind reader. You have to give constant feedback. But the more that you are doing it, it's going to become natural, and you're both going to get a better feel for how it works, and it'll be much, much easier. But so if you train your assistant to say, I want you to only send me, I want you to only flag for me emails that are truly important, that I must see and I must respond to, and you believe is important. Now, again, at the beginning, maybe you work through that together. Maybe for a few weeks, you look at it together and, the assistant will tell you, okay, I think this is important or it's not. And you can then say, well, you're right or you're wrong, and here's why, right? So it's just a training process. And what happens is your assistant then can respond to that client, and they can say, Heather is busy right now, but can I help you with this? And they may even be able to help, right? Because maybe they're just asking for a copy of a document, or maybe there's an associate or someone else on your team that can help instead. Again, if you've worked with, these really productive rainmaking equity partners, or even the CEO of a company, you know that they've got this figured out. And so the sooner you can figure it out, you will actually be rising to the top even faster. So let your assistant facilitate where he or she can. And then there are probably a lot of emails that you do need to get to and you need to respond to, but they're not urgent. They're not an emergency. So you can set aside a time each and every day. You can set aside a block, and you may not have the luxury of being able to choose the same time every day. But you can say, I'm going to answer emails, maybe it's the first 30 minutes of the day, the last hour of the day, an hour in the middle. It doesn't really matter, but you need to choose how often you're going to be looking at and responding to emails. And preferably, your assistant is weeding out all of the crap and responding and taking care of a lot of them so that you're only left with the ones that are important. I'm sure you've also experienced really long chains, right? So there's been 20 people back and forth talking about an issue. If you wait and deal with that block at a certain time, then you can read it in summary form. And so it's not breaking up your day all day. If this seems really scary to you and you're worried that your clients are going to be like, what? Then what you can do is just try it hourly. So you're going to do your work, and the last 10 minutes of every hour, you're going to look at your email. So even if you're not using your assistant, and I highly encourage that you do so, just limit it to that 10 minutes and don't respond to each one. Just scroll through what is important, what requires a response right now, only answer those, and then leave the rest for one of those larger blocks. So maybe it's an hour at the end of the day where you're then going to handle the other emails that are not urgent. Again, if you're struggling with this concept, just think back to those days where you're in a deposition, where you're in court. How do things get handled then? And that will give you a good idea of how you can start handling them in the same way when you're simply at your desk. The same holds true. Now, here's the thing. You have trained others as to your availability and how you will respond to them. So when you start changing that up, you're going to have to retrain them. And it may take a little bit of time. When you start implementing boundaries for the very first time, people may not know what to do with that. So if you no longer have an open door policy, right? Maybe you have your door shut. Maybe you work from a coffee shop or a conference room at certain times of the day because that might be more productive for you. That's okay. Now, if you have fear of disapproval, if you're a people pleaser, you might have to work through this a little bit. But people are going to come ask you quick questions. They're going to walk in. They're going to shoot you a ton of emails and phone calls if you have trained them to know that you are always available. You're going to have to start retraining them to know that that's no longer how you do business. It is totally doable. I did this, and I have clients that do this. It is totally doable. You will get through to the other side, and it is so much better. Okay, so the key to this quadrant is to delegate. Have a process, have a filter, delegate, delegate, delegate. Okay, that took up most of our time, but it truly is the most important one for attorneys. But let's still talk about the other two. Let's quickly go to quadrant number 4. This is the bottom left corner. So it is neither urgent nor important. And you would think that as busy as we are as attorneys, that we would not spend any time here. But that's not true. We actually spend a lot of time here. Let me give you some examples. Social media, TV, surfing the internet, hanging out, talking in the hallway, in the break room. We use this as a distraction. There is nothing wrong with downtime, but we can better utilize our downtime to help us. This quadrant, quite frankly, should be about your mental and physical health, in my opinion. So if you are anxious, if you are bored, that is when you tend to do these mind-numbing things as a way to relieve stress and to procrastinate and to resist whatever you need to be doing. Instead of wasting your time scrolling through social media, we're all guilty, right? Like you get addicted, like you're scrolling for much longer than you thought you would be. And you're like, what am I doing? Or you just completely numb out to TV or surfing the internet. Unless those things are truly bringing you stress relief, it would be better to go exercise or to go for a walk or to do something that is actually productive and beneficial to your physical, emotional, mental health. Doing these things, for the most part, after the fact, we don't feel better, right? Like we still have to do the work and we don't feel better. It's just mind-numbing activity. So if you find yourself in quadrant 4, as much as you can, delete it, limit it, find better outlets. Quadrant number 1, we're going to go all the way back up. This is the top left-hand corner. It is important, but it is not urgent. We most neglect this area. It should, however, be our primary focus. If you stay in this quadrant the majority of your time, you are going to start reaching some crazy goals. You are really going to skyrocket in your career, and you're going to find that you have more time outside of the office. You're going to find that you have more time to focus on what is meaningful to you. Because if you're in quadrant number 1, then you're not in quadrant number 3, which is the huge vampire, the huge time suck of most of our lives. So how do you stay in quadrant number 1? Well, many of us procrastinate. And because we think that we're putting out fires that we need to just be delegating or filtering, we don't have time to get to these things that don't have some type of pressure associated with them. And for some of us, this started in law school or even college, where we were procrastinating on our deadlines, and it's become a really bad habit. But every habit can be broken. So in this category, if you do not plan, if you do not prioritize, it will not get done until it becomes an emergency and you have that deadline, right over top of you. But your work product suffers. Many of us say, I say this, that we work better under pressure. But that's just a cop-out. That is just an excuse. The truth is, when you give yourself time to do something, you're more creative, you are more accurate, you don't have as many mistakes, and the work product is just better. And for those of us that say we work better under a deadline, we don't actually work better on a deadline. We don't have the opportunity to resist. And so we're forced to do it. That doesn't make it better. So how do you stay in quadrant 1? And I'm really guilty of this. So I've got a few tips for you and what's helped me. It's all about planning. It is all about planning. It is about project management, and it is about dedicating time each and every day to focusing on these issues. Because if you don't focus on your marketing, if you don't focus on your business development, if you don't focus on your goals, your personal and professional goals, then you are a hamster on a wheel and you are never moving forward. If you are stuck, we talked about this in episode number 2, if you focus on quadrant number 1, where you get really focused on what you want and why, and you go after it, then you're going to see a lot of forward progress and you're going to get off of that hamster wheel. So one thing that you can do is you can block off time each and every day to focus on the things that need to be handled. But you don't just have that time blocked off and then sit there and say, okay, what am I going to do today? You've already planned it. You already know. You see the schedule, you see the horizon, and you don't just have something on your calendar. So for example, you don't just have that you have a summary judgment motion due. You actually already have it outlined. You have projects, you have tasks, you know who's handling it, you know what the due dates are. This is project management. If you can become a good project manager, if you can learn to plan quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, and block out time to actually focus on these things each and every day. There's always going to be times when you can't, right? If you're in court or you're in a deposition or you have a big deal, you can't. But for the most part, you can. And this is where I encourage you to start spending as much time as possible. Get out of quadrant 3, get into quadrant 1, and your life and your career will change in miraculous ways. So if you're wondering, how do I get started doing this? Well, I encourage you to print out that matrix. Again, if you come to hustleandflowpodcast.com/3, you will have that matrix. There's a free download. You can print it out. Or if you have a copy in Stephen Covey's book and you prefer that design instead, that is fine. But have it out. Put it on your desk. You can have it as a screensaver. And as things come in, just get in the habit of trying to identify what quadrant it actually belongs in. And if it is within, quadrant number 4 or 3, then you need to be delegating it. With 1, you should be planning it. And if you think that a lot of things are falling in quadrant 2, you're probably calling something more important than it is. So just get honest with yourself. And one way to do that is on the front end, you can look at the matrix and assign things. And then at the end of the day, review it. And with hindsight, you often can see it a little more clearly. So in hindsight, if you're like, that really wasn't that important, but in the moment I thought it was, it can help you identify what trigger it is that is causing you to think something is more important than it is. And you can sometimes identify ways to catch yourself in the moment. Ask your team to hold you accountable. So, recruit your assistant, recruit other associates or people that are on your team. Tell them that this is what you're going to start doing and ask for their help in holding you accountable and calling you out when you are not following through with your plan. So there you have it. That is the priority matrix so that you can start to take back your day so that you can be in control of your time so that you're not spending it on things that do not matter and do not move the ball forward. Head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com and leave a comment. Let me know what you're thinking. What was helpful? Did you have any aha moments? Are there other ways that you like to manage your time? Join the discussion. Let's help each other out. And you can grab your free download there with a copy of that matrix. If you are enjoying this podcast, I encourage you to subscribe. That will make sure that every single episode is downloaded onto your phone so that you have it on the go when you are ready to listen. I would also really appreciate it if you would leave a rating and a review, an honest review on iTunes or Stitcher, whatever platform you are listening to. It certainly helps in getting the podcast out to other attorneys that may also need a little bit of help with hustle and flow in their lives. I appreciate your time and support, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. For show notes, downloads, and other free resources, and to keep the conversation going, head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com. See you there.